from the first 5 verses. Ruth 1:1 to 5. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, who one named Opare and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. What a tragedy. So from this ministration, I will be taking you through the story of Elimelech and Naomi, who had embarked on a journey, and the repercussion in their walk with the Lord. Very interesting story we find. Now, again, this story in which a family that we just mentioned made a bad decision, and because of the bad decision they made, that decision became an exchange point. An exchange point because they were running away from famine. And unfortunately, because they were running away from famine, they ended up entering and into a moment where they buried 3 members of the family. By virtue of running from famine, they entered into the situation where they conducted 3 funerals for family members, assuming without admitting that they had stayed where they were. But but they embarked on a journey. Now, Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote in his book, The Conduct of Life, and let me quote a part that says, "The efforts which we make to escape from our destiny only serve to lead us into it." The effort you try to make by virtue of running away from your destiny, rather and that is exactly what happened to Jonah. Jonah thought he was running away from God. Unfortunately for him, he ended up in that destiny. And what Ralph Waldo Emerson is saying is very true and appropriate in our situation. In fact, he wrote the book in 1860, and as we speak today, it is appropriate. It suits our situation, because God gave us freedom of choice. We can ignore the will of God. You can choose to argue about it. You can choose to disobey it, even fight against it. But you must understand that at the end of the day, it is the will of God that shall prevail. It is the counsel of the Lord that shall prevail. You may be trying to run away from the Lord. Come what may, you will be running into your destiny. So it is very, very important and instructive for us to learn to live by the precepts of God, to learn to live in the will of God, not to run out of the will of God. Psalm 33 and verse 11 tells us that the counsel of the Lord stands forever. Psalm 33 and verse 11. But the plans of the Lord stand firm forever. The purposes of his heart through all generations. So it is not only in the generation of Elimelech and Naomi, through all generations. So in our generation, the counsel of the Lord still stands forever. In Deuteronomy 4:35, we are told that he does according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. He does his will. He does his will. According to in the army of the host of heaven and also the inhabitants of the earth. Kadi brando zagada. Isundi gado grande badosha. Now, Job also has a word for us. Job has a word for us. And what is he saying? I say, who has hardened himself against him and prospered? Job 9:4. Who has hardened himself against him and prospered? Why no I na adwen sa me de tintintinti me prim me koma say ne me pa na meye. Now I see it doesn't work that way. It cannot work. His wisdom is profound. His power is vast. Who has resisted him and came out unscathed? King James says, who has hardened himself against him and prospered? You cannot harden yourself against the Lord and you prosper. That is the New King James. So Job knew the answer, and so do we. Nobody. The answer is nobody. Obianiwa or ninyami ediasi obianiwa or prim no come and why na adwensa me de ne me pa na me ye na asi ni ye dabi. If we obey God's will, everything in life holds together. But if we disobey, everything starts to fall. Things fall apart and the center can no longer hold. Why not cancer? Kasubrande gadosha izundabada. Now the truth is better illustrated in the experiences of Elimelech and his wife Naomi. This truth that we have established said you cannot harden your heart against the Lord and you prosper. You cannot decide to go your own way and it will be well with you until you decide, and unless you decide that I want to live in the counsel of the Lord, I want to live in the will of the Lord, forget it. Now in this chapter, Elimelech and his wife Naomi made 3 substantive mistakes in life. They made such mistakes in life and it brought them problems. 3 mistakes are made by this couple in this chapter that we must learn to avoid in our walk with the Lord. Trials and temptations will come our way. Problems may come our way, but we need to stay with the Lord. We need to live in the will of the Lord, not to run away from the problem. The first mistake they made was to live in unbelief. They lived in unbelief and they tried to run away from the problems. But man, see, he who lives to fight and run away lives to fight another day. If you fight and you run away from the fight, we'll be in the fight and that's all. So until you learn to fight and conquer, it will still stare at you. And the next time I am more hardened. Unbelief, because they did not trust in the Lord. They did not believe in the Lord. They did not wholeheartedly comply to the will of God. People decided to do their own thing, go their own way. And maybe be ma wabemu mu ma onka se ne aduro de me am fa me kwan na makopa me mo a ne aduro de me am try se betumi afa ba bia me so me nya mo afri. No. Now they tried to run away from the problem. And I'm going to look at it from three basic perspectives. The timing, number one, the timing. Now, this was the time that judges ruled, and life wasn't easy in those days because there were no kings in Israel, according to Judges 17 and verse 6. There was no king in Israel, and because of that, everybody did what pleased him. It is only when that person has been summoned before the judge and because there was no proper conduct by virtue of leadership, that is what the Bible is saying. So it seems very incredible and unbelievable that a beautiful story like Elimelech and Naomi begins and ends on that note. How can you begin a journey as couple with your two sons who goes into another town, another city, another nation to get married to the people of that place, and then at the time of returning to your country you come empty-handed? How? This beautiful story ended up in a calamitous period and a calamitous way. And it is also true today. Very true today. In most places we experience moral decadence, we experience difficulties of every kind in our situation, in our nation, in our cities, in our families. Niama nkoye entokwa ewa waremu entokwa ewa adwumamu entokwa wo ministry mu entokwa wa niama things become bizarre. And because of that, if you are not careful, you may take a decision, a wrong decision that will not bring you good results. Remember, the program is a walk with the Lord. Elimelech and the wife Naomi were walking with the Lord, but unfortunately they decided to channel and to go their own path, and that ended them with calamity. In spite of all these challenges that goes on around us in our world, the love of God is still shared abroad. Nyankopon dono onsesane edaso wo ho edaso ye fresh. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. They are new every morning. Anope bi awurade doye foforo empo de mayen ye adeboye for. Thank you. So in these difficult and perverse times, there emerged the story of this couple, Elimelech and Naomi. Now, apart from looking at the timing, let's look at the place. They were living, or they came from the city of Bethlehem. Bethlehem. Now, in the Hebrew language, Bethlehem, Beth is the house, and Lehem is bread. So they were living in the city of bread, in the house of bread. Now, how can you live in the city of bread, the house of bread, and you are still suffering? You are still going through hunger and starvation. How possible? How possible? It's just like the story of this gentleman who lived at the beautiful gate and was begging. That guy was living at the beautiful gate, but there was nothing beautiful or handsome about his life. Elimelech and Naomi came from a city that was full of bread, and this was the city that Jesus came from. And in John chapter 6, we are told that Jesus says, I am the bread of life. He came from that city. And you ran away because of famine. Now, in the Old Testament, famine was often an evidence of God's discipline because his people have sinned against him. One of the punishment or the bomb so say obema e come ba nso nto na aduane ayeye ti e come ba di won no many about. Unfortunately, because the Bible says the pabone for di or mine so or mine bread. There may be godly people in the city, but because or more AD or mine so yet ungodly, you know, the godly people are also affected. So the godly had to suffer, unfortunately, because of the ungodly even in Bethlehem, where there was abundance of bread. The godly had to suffer. It is possible that Elimelech and Naomi were godly people, but because the entire nation has sinned against the Lord and punishment of famine had come upon them, they also had to suffer. Yes, Awurade say ye man mu, Awurade be hu ye mabo no ama ye mpanyifo ne akandifo a omo dwene wo Awurade so, omo kuma wo Awurade so, na omo dwene da ache, omo dwene konkan, omo dwene manipa, omo dwene ma da ache nchirima, na omo sura Awurade. Omo di animu a ya mre. Because when the ungodly rules, the godly will still suffer. So apart from the timing, the place, let's look at the decision they made. Now, when trouble comes our way, we can do one of three things in life. When you are confronted with a calamitous situation, with challenges in life, say ya worry, say your ministry, say your jumam, say your health, say your day, usikasem. There are three things that is likely that you may do, and I'm going to talk about them. You may either endure the challenges, the problems that comes your way. You may either endure it. That is one. Or number two, you can decide to escape, run away from it. Or number three, you can decide to enlist it. Enlist. So, police for military for and then enlistment. No. So when they do enlistment, it's a way of enrolling people into it. So you can decide that whatever the tide is, whatever the storm is, I will enroll into it. Where the tide becomes so strong, if you decide to run away, but what they do, they say, they enlist in it, and then they find themselves in another place. Now, when you take one of these, either one of these three decisions, let me tell you the repercussion. If we only endure our trials or problems that comes our way, like it happened to Elimelech and Naomi, then trials will become your master. If you decide to endure, the trial will become your master, and you have the tendency to become hard and bitter. If you want to endure, it will rather overcome you and becomes your master, and therefore you become so hard and bitter about life. Check your life. Say did you decide to endure it? And if you are enduring it, know that the end result, and say you become so hard and bitter. To be yesterday. Number two, if you try to escape that trials or temptations or problems that come your way, then you probably miss the mind of God and the will of God and the purpose of God for your life that He wants you to achieve in that trial. The third one is that if you learn to enlist our trials, these trials will become our servants instead of our masters and work for us. Romans 8:28 says, all things will work for you if you enlist in that trials. In the life of Elimelech and Naomi, did they enlist in the trials? Did they escape it, or did they endure it? Whatever decision they took at the end of the day, the end result was bitter. And then later on, I'll talk about it. When Naomi came back and everybody was meeting him, calling him Naomi, then they will say, Mom frame Naomi, Mom frame Mara. Why? Because I went with happiness, but I'm coming with bitterness. That was according to her. But the question is, did she consult God to ask whether God approved of that decision? Our relationship now, business now do seek a question. Ni I wouldn't know about Adam for ni I wouldn't know two kind. So what be said would I just say? asese me to sa na mon ba asere nyom se asem bia me kan de bia me ye esese me bisa se ebeye Yesu fa na. Have you ever considered and asked God that, Lord, this decision that I'm taking in life, is it worth it? Does it please you? Elimelech made the wrong decision when he decided to leave home. He made the wrong decision when he decided to leave home. Why are we saying he made the wrong decision? What made his decision a wrong one? Number one, he walked by sight and not by faith. Wan fajidia nante o nia ohun abrabomu no abusua nia yehunu ne nei mama ne mmu ye wabamu nia ekoso abrabomu nei mama ne mmu wabamu enne na nia mamu ayade enne na opesia ochina nsuo beto. Weeping endures for a night, but joy comes in the morning. My dear Christian friends, in the story of Abraham in Genesis 12 and verse 10 following, Abraham made the same mistake when he encountered a famine in the land of the promise. So also decided, he said, no, let me try me because at the end of instead of waiting for God to tell him what to do next, he fled to Egypt and got into trouble. No matter how difficult our circumstances may be, the safest and the best place is in the will of God. No matter how difficult the circumstances may be. And found this and yasorchine baba also, and found this and yanipe diwatem, and found this and yanipe kasawenim, and found in yama ekosowa brabo. The best and the safest place to be is to live in the will of God. It's easy to say with David, oh, that I had wings like a dove, I would fly away and be at rest. Psalm 55 and verse 6. But it is also wiser to claim the promise that is found in Isaiah 40 and verse 31. I beg your pardon. David is saying, oh, sankaminyan tabai, et is a anoma, and kametu mako baby akohome. Of course, whatever we go through, whatever challenges we go through, but it is wise, it is very wise to live by this counsel, that those that wait on the Lord will renew their strength, not those who run away, not those who fly away. When you wait, then you will renew your strength, and therefore you will be able to soar on the wings like an eagle. You run and you not grow weary. You walk and you will not faint. Why? Because you have waited and lived in the promise of the Lord. How do we walk? By faith. You do so by claiming the promises of God and obeying the word of God. In spite of what you see, how you feel, or what may happen. It means committing yourself to the Lord, relying wholly on Him to meet the need. When we live by faith, it glorifies God. The witnesses, it witnesses to the lost world and builds better and proper Christian character into our lives. God has ordained that the righteous will live by faith, according to Hebrews 2 and verse 4. And when we refuse to trust Him, we are calling God a liar and dishonoring Him. My dear Christian friends, as I wind down, Isaiah 5 and verse 21 is very instructive. Isaiah 5 and verse 21. It says, woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight. In my next ministration, I will look at the second reason why we say Elimelech made the wrong choice. He made the wrong move. This is why I bring today's ministration to a close. I was for that Eradia Sony a diddy year now on am na sem so I say in crime. Now may aduma and then our train over to Menka. Shalom, peace, bye bye.
abusuafo ebenaso say enya yekohia wo Atwea Mountain Personal Church